Everyone assumed threatening tariffs would force Canada into submission. For 75 years, American presidents used economic pressure to bend Canadian policy. Nixon tried it with oil, Reagan threatened it with lumber. Every modern president understood the leverage that comes from being Canada's biggest market. Trump built his entire Canada strategy on this assumption. Everyone was wrong. October 26, 2025, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. While Donald Trump threatened to impose a 10% additional customs duty as punishment for a television advertisement, Mark Carney delivered a message to Southeast Asian leaders that, honestly, shocked Washington. We want a rules-based system. We respect trade agreements and the rule of law. He wasn't begging. He wasn't negotiating. He was moving forward. Canada had publicly declared that it preferred partnerships with Asia over American dominance. In this timing, just hours after Trump's tariff threat from Air Force One, Canada sent a message that American officials are only now beginning to understand. Canada no longer needs Washington's approval. Trump thought a 10% tariff increase would break Canada's resolve. He assumed Carney would rush to cancel meetings and apologize to smooth things over. He was wrong. Instead, Carney announced a $25 million fund for Canada-ASEAN free trade negotiations. While Trump was losing his mind in public over a television ad, Carney was creating alternatives worth $42 billion a year. Think about what this represents: the Prime Minister of Canada standing in a room with leaders from Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, and 6 other dynamic economies, choosing to invest in their future rather than begging for American mercy. The contrast between Trump's chaos and Carney's strategy couldn't be sharper. So, to understand why Trump's revenge strategy failed so spectacularly, we really need to look at what set him off in the first place. The Ontario government had run a television advertisement during the World Series, and it featured Ronald Reagan warning about the dangers of tariffs. Trump, called it fake, a fraud, and he claimed Reagan's words were taken out of context, even though, honestly, the speech is publicly available. Reagan was a committed free trader, someone who understood the tariffs actually hurt American consumers and workers. But, Trump's reaction really tells us everything about his state of mind at the time. On October 24th, he terminated all trade negotiations with Canada. And then, just 2 days later, on October 26th, while flying to Malaysia aboard Air Force One, he announced an additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods. His justification? Well, he said it was because the ad ran during Friday night's World Series game, even though Ontario Premier Doug Ford had promised to pull it by Monday morning. Trump made this announcement without giving Carney any advance notice at all. In fact, the Prime Minister of Canada learned about the 10% tariff increase the same way ordinary Canadians did, through Trump's social media posts. That's just not how allies treat each other. That's, honestly, how bullies operate. Trump assumed this move would maximize pressure on Carney and force a humiliating climb down. He assumed Canada would have no choice but to apologize and beg. What Trump didn't anticipate, though, was Carney's complete indifference to his tantrum. For Canadian families dealing with the economic impacts, the stakes are very real. Higher prices at Canadian Tire, layoffs in Ontario, these are the effects of Trump's tariffs. Carney's question isn't whether Canada can afford to diversify, but whether it can afford not to. At the 47th ASEAN Summit, Carney attended as guest of the chair. ASEAN represents 692 million people and a $5 trillion economy. Canada's trade with ASEAN is $42.3 billion annually. In his address, Carney emphasized reliability, predictability, and a rules-based system, which, really contrasted sharply with Trump's trade chaos. He announced a $25 million commitment to help ASEAN states engage with Canada on free trade negotiations, signaling a serious intent to secure a Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement next year. Carney also held bilateral meetings with Laos focusing on energy-critical minerals and technology, and with Malaysia discussing halal cooperation and cybersecurity. Symbolically, while Trump attended a Thailand-Cambodia peace ceremony, Carney was actually building Canada's economic future without American involvement. They did not meet, nor did Carney need to. This matters for everyday Canadians. Diversifying trade means finding buyers in countries with growing middle classes. ASEAN's population is over twice the U.S. population. Indonesia has 270 million people. Vietnam is growing 6 to 7% annually. Canadian businesses are actively exploring these markets. Economic power is shifting toward Asia, and early movers like Canada will benefit for decades. So, Trump supporters argue that Canada is risking too much by defying America. After all, about 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States, but Carney's goal isn't to abandon the U.S. altogether. It's really about reducing dependence and, well, changing the leverage dynamic. Now, some say that Asian countries just won't trust Canada because of its alignment with the U.S., but interestingly, Trump himself kind of destroyed that argument with his, erratic policies. Asia sees dysfunction in Washington and, honestly, opportunity. Sure, critics worry about China, but Carney's ASEAN strategy actually creates leverage by showing that Canada has real alternatives. The anti-American claim is misleading. Carney responds rationally to Trump's aggressive policy. On October 26, 2025, Trump had a public tantrum, while Carney signed billion-dollar agreements with countries representing nearly 700 million people. This isn't a mistake. It's statecraft. Canada publicly demonstrated that American approval is no longer a prerequisite for Canadian foreign policy. Comparing to Pierre Trudeau in the 1970s, Carney's $25 million commitment, bilateral meetings, and refusal to respond to Trump's provocations represent a fundamental shift in Canada-US relations. Middle powers like Canada can chart independent courses, and, other nations are watching. The next test, the APEC summit in South Korea. Trump will not meet Carney, but Carney will meet dozens of other leaders. Canada is showing that it can pursue its national interest independently even when American leadership is, honestly, unstable. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on global politics and economics. Your support helps us bring more in-depth analysis straight to your screen.